How do you counter Russian CV? Well, first off, you need to know what a Russian CV is going to do. So first off, Russian CV is going to exist against broadside targets. That is very important. That is very, very important, and is something that we're going to have to consider as we, continue to look into this. They are slow. It may not feel slow, especially if you have a CV that is very close to you, in which case tier 8 and tier 10, well, I guess the tier 10 is not released, but I mean, they have rocket boosters when they zip off the deck. So if you are in aggressively close proximity to a Russian CV, maybe they're over an island or something, they can sling planes after planes after planes after planes to you. So slow is important in the sense that if the planes are going into a long distance, that really adds up. However, if the CV is based on an island and is able to strike very quickly, that is overcome. This is something that the CV driver themselves has to choose how they want to overcome, but often it means aggressive positioning, which is something you can capitalize on. Low health. This is also very important to remember in terms of AA, and then distance. By distance, what I mean is strike distance, how far away they're actually going to be shooting you. So first off, we're going to look at broadside. What does broadside mean? So we'll pretend that I'm going to use red ships, because red ships often, at least in my head, mean target, whereas green ships are, friendly. So we're just going to use this in terms of like how to whatever. So let's pretend that we've got, say, a cruiser that's over there, and we'll have a cruiser here. We'll have a cruiser here. We'll have another ship in this area, and then we'll have a destroyer. We'll have a DD. That's what, 6? So we might have a battleship out here. Have another battleship out here, whatever, something else back there, and obviously an enemy CV, which can be doing whatever the hell they're doing over here. And this is good enough. So first off, broadside. What does broadside mean? Well, think about the attack lines of what broadside means. Broadside means you have these strike angles. Come on. Unfortunately, my old mouse died, so the new one is not that great. So if we look at in terms of these strike angles, first off, we have to look at how do we mitigate the strike angles for these certain things. So first, in the front, we can see a destroyer. This has exploitable strike angles. Why? Because it's in the middle of an open area of water, which means that you can get close to the surface of the water and try to skip bomb the DD if the DD is spotted. You could try to torp the DD if you really wanted to, whatever, because you have access to strike into it. Similarly, the battleship in the back, you have the same. This battleship in the back, you have the same. And to an extent, this battleship over on the side, you have the same. But if you take this battleship and you simply move it over to a small extent, we'll put this transparent. If you move it over, suddenly you're so close to the wall that you don't have the ability to strike that side. You don't have the line there, which means in order to strike this, you're going to have to come in from this angle. Well, what's the problem with that? You have a cruiser. What is a cruiser going to do? It's going to kill 1 or 2 planes. If you're coming in with 6 planes and now you lose 2 of them, then you attack with 4 planes. And it might be that when you attack the battleship, you lose an additional 1 plane. So then suddenly your 6 strike became a 3 strike, and you lost 3 planes. And after you shoot, you're probably shooting in this area, which means those planes die as well. So you have to understand this from a CV's perspective. What is the way in? In this particular instance, let's say the battleship moved over a little. What is the way in to the Baltimore? The way into the Baltimore is all the way over here, getting shot by cruiser AA from this area, getting shot by the Baltimore or potentially the battleship back here, and then trying to turn in while being shot by the battleship and now the cruiser itself as they come in to strike. There's a lot of plane loss that's going to happen from point A to point B. So you have to pay attention to what are the roadblocks, what are the entrance vectors, how do you get in to make the strike? Instead of going that long way, you could go this way, in which case you're now dealing with the battleship AA and the cruiser AA, and over, you probably lose 3, maybe 4 planes doing this, so instead of striking with 6 planes, you strike with 2. This is not going to work. How about this one? Well, this is probably an easier line, as you can skirt and use the island cover to block the AA to be able to come in over here and make a strike. That's possible. It's a bit of a sharp turn, but it's possible. And this is simply gonna be awkward to cut around here to be able to somehow come in and strike this. So when you start looking at it in terms of broadside angling, think of it not in terms of, well, I'm putting my broadside away from the front line so he can't lease time to it. That is part of it. But do you have blockers? Do you have people that are going to be here locking down that broadside position? Because if we look at this, in order to get here, we have to go across a battleship. We have to go across other stuff. So we can't go that way. We have to go this way. But then we're going all the way up in Never Never Land. And what is the piece of this that totally fucks that up? Slow. The Immelmann. The Immelmann is something that has quite a lot of speed, 240 something knots, pretty significant amount of speed. And then you get into a Poboda, or you get into the Chkalov or whatever, and you're going 160. You lose about 80 knots worth of speed. That's a Kleber and a half worth of speed that you don't have. So in order to get from point A to point B, instead of taking 40 seconds to go around, suddenly this is taking 60 or 70 seconds to go around, which is a lot of time to linger in AA, get shot, etc. And the other big difference between the Immelmann and the Russian CVs is the Immelmann can sustain plane losses and still be able to strike you with its full complement of 4 things, 4 torps, 4 bombs, whatever. Russian CV does not. It is limited. It is limited by planes that have low health. Any, and I mean any, AA interaction can result in dead planes, including destroyer interactions. Destroyers can kill planes, battleships can kill planes, cruisers can kill planes, etc. And you have to remember that when they're striking, they will be striking at a distance. So it's not about the ship, the target ship, killing the planes. It's about the teammates stopping the planes from getting there in the first place. So when you're positioning, you are not positioning to say, I'm an AA ship, I'm going to protect myself. You're looking at, I'm an AA ship, I'm going to cock block an area. Well, what does that mean? Somebody asked about a fighter. You know, what if you have a fighter consumable? So let's go ahead and do that. Let's make a little mock-up fighter consumable here. So there's a circle, and then we'll have some green, and boop. All right, so let's pretend that you're in the Enterprise, and you've got this nice, cool-looking fighter consumable that you can use. Well, where are you going to be able to put this? So let's think about entry vectors. All right, entry vector A. We're trying to deal with this stuff. We could hug the wall and strike a battleship. We could make that happen. That's possible. That's an entry vector. Here is not. We're going to be cutting between 2 ships. They're probably just going to rip us apart. It's not an entry vector. How about here? We might take some chip damage from one or the other cruiser, but we could probably end up cutting this and maybe swing in to get a strike. It's not going to be great. It's going to be dirty, but it's an entry vector. This is less likely to happen because there's a battleship in the way, so we won't have to entertain that idea, but we could, in fact, try to skirt this and come over and hit the battleship. This is also an entry vector. How about over here? We can ride the island cover, and we can swing in and strike this ship. That's absolutely a possibility. We could try to come in here, but as it's a bit of a pinch, and there's a CV in the way, this is probably not very viable, so we're not going to look at that. And then we have this to an extent, although the cruiser is there, and more likely this we can work on. And lastly, we could do a very long-handed strike and try and come around here, but frankly, with the 2 people grouped up, it's going to be an awkward lay. Now, this might be a distant strike where you drop here, trying to cut in at long range. So looking at this in terms of entry vectors, what could we do with the fighter? Well, we can simply place the fighter to block an entry vector. Suddenly, if the planes want to come in, they have to go across a fighter or they have to go across AA. So it's not about actually just sitting a fighter on top of the ship, it's about plugging the holes. So in this case, let's drop a fighter there. And we could, if we wanted to, drop a fighter here, or drop a fighter here, Because if the planes are going to come back here, they're going to interact with AA, so this will hold. Or maybe there's an enemy ship here and the fighter will get shot down. So we could just drop a fighter here in general, or potentially drop a fighter here, which not only protects the DD in the front, but also because it's blocking on this edge here, the planes can no longer cut in. So if the CV, in this instance, decides to play over on this flank, by blocking these two entry vectors, the planes cannot come in. Or if they do come in, they'll take sufficient amount of losses to be unable to strike at strength, forcing the enemy CV to either A, try to brute force down the fighters before they can come in by dropping their own fighter consumables or trying to wait, or hopefully their team pushes up, or the enemy CV is going to be pushed off to the opposing flank where it may be able to find ways in. So we have to remember, Russian CVs strike at broadside targets. You choose where your broadside is. You can use islands to block the broadside approaches for torpedoes and skip bombs and rockets, although you may get skip bombed over an island or you may take some rocket damage over an island. That's going to depend on how you choose to position. Remember, the planes are slow, which means it takes a really long period of time for them to go all the way around to try to come in on the back end to strike a broadside that's blocked from the front half. CVs often want a least time approach. They want to go directly from point A to point B so that they're not dicking with wasting time, wasting planes, other stuff like that. And if you force the CV to take a detour to be able to get to you, especially in a Russian CV, that's going to add a lot of time and reduce their influence on the match. Remember, low health is important. Even a destroyer with not that great AA, as long as they hit priority sector, they will kill planes, because there's just no health there. So even a DD can be used to help block an entry vector on a torp plane, because the DD is not going to be torped. They're going to be torping cruisers or battleships. So having even a destroyer that's marginal could still kill a torp plane, which is one less torp coming in on you, which is one less damage interaction. And then lastly is the attack distance. Because of this, you have to understand you are going to be attacked from almost at your medium range AA or potentially outside of it, which means your damage is not what's going to stop the CV. The teammates' area of effect and lockdown is what's going to stop the Russian CV, because it's going to prevent the planes from getting to you. One thing to note, the Chkalov is really what kicked off this whole lesson, and the Chkalov has two special differences to it. It is not as restrained by broadside concepts. You have basically a Graf Zeppelin reticle where you can drop up to 6 bombs, but the planes have very, very little health. Striking a cruiser will often result in half of the planes being dead before they get to you. Striking a battleship will result in the same or potentially worse. The bombs are basically only useful against destroyers, and that's if a destroyer has no AA support at all and no AA for itself to be able to cover it. So in the case of being against a Chkalov, if you start noticing planes working your flank or working your position, you need to respect the threat and start to pull back a bit, because you're not going to be able to go solo or go express yourself against an enemy that has the ability to strike you from any angle with fairly consistent bombs. And then secondly, the torpedoes drop in a very tight cluster, so it's not a broadside requirement to be able to strike forward with the Chkalov because of how tight the torps are, but still, being in a situation like this, where you are only really showing, your nose or some of the side, they can strike in on that, but that's the difference between taking 6 torpedoes, which is, I'm just going to make up a number, 30,000 damage, and taking 2, which is 10,000 damage. It's a significant difference, and if they don't have the ability to move in to actually strike your broadside, you're basically ripping up their effectiveness by a third. And if they're going to strike your broadside and lose 2 planes, they can strike your nose and lose 2 planes. The CV is going to want to get the most efficient strike possible, so they'll be looking for the better strike if at all possible. So having the ships that are going to block, just like you would on the Tech Tree CVs, will continue to protect you long term. Hopefully this was helpful.